This week on the Woven Energy Podcast.
But that's not what I'm saying, though, Joe. What I'm saying is, it doesn't matter. From a shamanistic point of view, they were all humans. Shamanism is built into nature. It's a fact of nature, as I think we've discussed today a little bit. Shamanism is not limited to the human species. What I'd like people who are interested in shamanism to try to think about things in a more fluid way, in a flow and a flux. The fact that we've come to dominate this planet is an indication of just how powerful those early shamans were. You probably notice every now and again me referring to animals as people, and that's the result of my long involvement in shamanism. In most groups of social animals, there will be a creature that the other animals look to for help and guidance in times of trouble and danger. The definition that we've given, the non-woo-woo definition of shamanism that we've given, that creature is a shaman within that group. Even if one person anywhere in the world picks up what we're talking about and runs with it, delves into shamanism, becomes a shaman, starts benefiting the people around them with their shamanism, then I'll be happy. Job done.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith, here to talk about shamanism from the ground up. So the last 3 episodes have been quite heavy. We've gone into the first stage of shamanism in some depth. So if you haven't listened to those, then go and listen. They're really good with some quite in-depth exercises for you to do to really kickstart your journey, if you like, into shamanism. So, for those of you who haven't been paying attention, you might notice a favourite saying of Damon's, and that is, "That's for another podcast." So, I think it's a great idea now to address some of those things that came up in previous podcasts over the next few episodes and lay a bit more foundation, add a few more colours to the tapestry of shamanism before heading into stage 2. So, before we get into this, I want to ask you all a favour. I want you all to email me at joe@wovenenergy.com. That's JOE@wovenenergy.com, and send me one question that you have and absolutely anything to do with shamanism or anything that you've heard so far. It can be anything. There's no such thing as a stupid question. So what I want to do is put together a few Q&A sessions that really dive deep into your questions and gets your questions answered. So it's not just me and Damon talking about what we want to talk about all the time. It's about you guys as well. We want everybody to be involved and get something out of these podcasts. So the theme for today is shamanism and the domestication of the dog, which is going to be a really interesting look at the relationship between humans and human evolution and the animals. So, Damon, how are you today?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
I'm not bad. I'm really good, actually. So, how are you feeling about these podcasts so far? Are you enjoying them?
Yeah. I don't know that enjoying them is the right word. You know me.
Yeah.
What I am pleased with is the opportunity to try and reach out to a few more people. The number of people that anybody comes into contact with in their life is to a certain extent restricted, and of those people, the percentage that are likely to express or show any kind of interest in shamanism is fairly low. I guess I've been fairly blessed with yourself among a few others. But yeah, it's not so much that I enjoy doing them. It's more that I really appreciate the opportunity to, even if one person anywhere in the world picks up what we're talking about and runs with it and goes off and delves into shamanism, becomes a shaman, starts benefiting the people around them with their shamanism, then I'll be happy. That I'll feel job done.
Fantastic.
That's kind of how I feel about it. I feel good about the fact that we're doing it.
Yeah. And we have talked before about how, it is very hard to teach shamanism. Teaching might be the wrong word, but it's very hard to do it because, as we've talked about in one of the previous episodes, our bias for the baseline is quite extreme as civilized human beings. But what are you to do? What can we do? We've got to get the information across somehow, and if you're going to start putting something like this together, it's going to have to be put across in some sort of a logical and rational way.
Yeah. I think also the last 3 episodes were pretty heavyweight. Yeah. We're talking about, what we're addressing. We're trying to address the subject that the books about shamanism don't address, which is how to be a shaman, rather than just studying about them. And it will get heavy again, I'm afraid, when we get on to Amscot. It's going to get heavy again. So for us as well, I think just doing a couple of somewhat lighter, less heavy episodes will definitely be healthy.
Yes. Well, we have said, this is episode 10, so we've definitely mentioned it quite a few times now. That's for another podcast, as I was saying. So, I think it's a nice opportunity to kind of address some of those.
Sure.
See where it goes for a few weeks and then get right back into it, get back into the practicals. So I know you wanted to talk about something very specific today, which was the shamanism and the domestication of the dog. So do you want to kind of introduce that topic a little bit?
Yeah. Another we've done little tiny bits of animal spirits so far in our. Hey, we're on episode 10 now. In our episodes to date,
it's flown by, isn't it?
So we covered Borat, we covered Herzog, and now I'd like to talk about a very, very special animal spirit, Nochoi, which is the dog. As everybody's probably aware, the relationship between dogs and humans is that there's something about it that is, shall we say, unusual compared to the relationship between humans and other species in general. But I think a lot of people, although they can feel it, they can feel that there's something unusual there. I don't think they probably fully understand what that is. And so what I'd like to try to do in this episode is explore that. A lot of different types of social animals produce individuals within their group. So these are animals that live their lives and fill their environmental niches in groups. They band together. They're not solitary animals. They live in societies, and obviously human beings are such an animal, and so are dogs, Canids, if you want to refer to them as that. And groups of animals like these often produce individuals that the rest of the group looks to for a kind of wisdom or strategic input when there are times of difficulty. And these particular, within a troop of monkeys or within a group of wolves or, any type of social animal, baboons. But humans are representatives of the primates, where, among the animals, we are, in terms, one of the things that people like to do is put things in little boxes, and when we put ourselves in a little box scientifically, we're in with the primates, the monkeys and the apes. And the Canids, which include dogs, wolves, jackals, and various other creatures, foxes, they've produced a number of types of animals. The wolf would be an example of dogs, that are social creatures like that. And in both the primates, the social primates and the social canids, these individuals that the rest of the group looks to in times of difficulty are effectively shamans. So you can think of a group of chimpanzees, a group of bonobos, a group of wolves. In any of those three groups, there's regularly an individual that whenever there's trouble, all the eyes of the rest of the group or the ears of the rest of the group go to that particular animal. And that's because that animal, a number of things, that animal is close to nature. The animal has a lot of experience. Remember we talked about the guchach, yeah? That animal has guchach. That animal can often think of ways out of trouble or ways of leading the group out of trouble that the other animals might not come up with. So they have toshultin. And they're also decisive. They will make those decisions. They're not going to dither. They have bat. So you can see that they're turning to an animal that has good chelicity. The parallels between the primates and the canids are surprising given their very different lifestyles. The primates, obviously, if in evolutionary terms, the primates start to emerge, I think, early in the sort of Eocene epoch. That's probably about 55 million years ago, something like that. And as everybody knows, primates tend to be tree-dwelling creatures. You can probably imagine that we came from something that was probably not dissimilar to a squirrel. You know, it wasn't a squirrel. This is one of the things that we have with our putting things in little boxes. We tend to have this, and as a trained biologist, I guess I'm just as guilty as anyone else. We tend to put all these animals in little boxes. But if you remember, we said, you know, the Nakayama Miki's advice, look at things throughout the world and through all ages. When you look at evolution in that way, you see a plasticity. In animals like ourselves, and our cousins, the chimpanzees, the bonobos, and then further afield, the orangutans, and however far you go back.
Could you expand on that a little bit more? Because, like, if a biologist was listening to it, I mean, I'm sure a trained biologist would say, well, you know, maybe there's no choice than to put in boxes, because when you do look at the evidence, we share DNA, and, you know, I mean, we are, 99.9% with some primates, so it's kind of hard to.
All I mean in terms of plasticity is that every species, if you like, has a gene pool, but that gene pool is not static. It ebbs and flows. And for instance, if you take a hominid, I think you remember I mentioned on one of the podcasts, I said, well, how long we're talking about the advent of farming, and then the rise of civilization off the back of that, and what a small, 5 to 10,000 years, what a small portion that is of human evolution.
Absolutely.
But I couldn't exactly say what portion of human evolution that was, because I don't know when human stops. As a biologist, I don't know when humans stop. So I mentioned Australopithecus. Australopithecus afarensis was
Lucy, wasn't
it? Well, that's an example skeleton of the. But do you understand what I'm saying? Then sort of. That's the last one that people name something other than Homo, which means human. So Homo habilis sort of emerged, I guess, about 2 million years ago to 1.5 million years ago. That was the kind of time period that Homo habilis was around. And then you could say that Homo erectus, a much larger creature, a much larger human, emerged sort of, somewhat less than 2 million years ago, and then disappeared in inverted commas. I'm putting the inverted commas around the disappeared for a reason, 70,000 years ago. And then we have the famous Neanderthals, sort of 160,000 to about 40,000 years ago, something of that nature. The reason I put the inverted commas around that is that we can count them as different species, because they look different. But the truth is, if you took within any population of, say, Homo erectus, there are just like there are in human populations, there are a diversity of individuals, and they all look different from each other at any given point in time. And if you judiciously selected a few members of the Homo erectus population, and, you give them a shave and you dress them in modern clothes and you stuck them out on the street, if you picked those individuals carefully from, say, 1.5 million years ago, those members of Homo erectus species, i.e. not our species, we're Homo sapiens according to our classification, according to us putting things in little boxes, those people would walk down the street and nobody would notice. They would, if you picked them judiciously from their population. So what I'm saying, because of the range of variation in our own population, so what I'm saying is, genuinely, I studied evolution a long time, and I've studied shamanism, the evolution of shamanism and the relationship between shamanism and evolution. I don't know if there would be many people who studied that subject more than me. Maybe there are, but I don't know of them. But what I'm saying is, as a result of that study, I can't say when we stopped being human. We go back in time. I certainly would refer to Homo erectus as humans, Homo habilis as humans, and because I have this experience of animal spirits, I go back further than that. I feel there are a lot of human characteristics in chimpanzees. There are a lot of human characteristics in bonobos, orangutans, and it's like, how far do you want to go? Do you understand what I'm saying? There's a plasticity. You can think, rather than thinking of, Homo habilis was like this, Homo erectus was like this, Homo neanderthalensis was like this, and Homo sapiens is like this. There's a plasticity. And actually some of the recent research that's been done on the gene pool, the modern human gene pool, and from some surviving early hominid species, genetic data shows that there is some admixture. It's not a pure admixture. It's not like the populations completely merged with each other, but there was some admixture. So that what I'd like people who are interested in shamanism to try to think about things in a more fluid way, in a flow and a flux, so that imagine humans flowing down through the generations, and they're not just suddenly over one night turning into another species. There's a species of lizard, for instance, that live in a sort of U-shaped canyon, and if you pick on the west side of the canyon, the lizards can interbreed with each other as you go up the canyon wall. You go around the horseshoe at the top of the canyon, and you go down, they can all interbreed with each other, i.e. they're the same species, and you get to the bottom of the eastern canyon wall, and so you went all the way around, and picking two lizards out at any point, they can all interbreed with each other, i.e. by the definition of a species, all the same species. But when you get to the end of that loop, you pick one from the bottom of the western canyon wall and one from the bottom of the eastern canyon wall, and those lizards cannot interbreed with each other. They're different species. So do you understand what I'm saying? It's a flux. It's a flow of genetic and inherited information through the generations.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's widely accepted that Homo sapiens bred with the Neanderthals quite readily. I know that's accepted.
But that's not what I'm saying, though, Joe. What I'm saying is, to me, it doesn't matter. They were all humans.
Yeah.
Do you follow what I'm saying? That from a shamanistic point of view, they were all humans. I'd go back to Australopithecus afarensis, human. Yeah, go back to, and in some ways, of course, we didn't come from chimpanzees. Chimpanzees and us, we had a common ancestor, and that common ancestor was human, as far as I'm concerned. And as I said, it's when we talk about humans from a shamanistic point of view, human beings are not separate from nature. As we've said before, they're part of the ebb and flow of nature. And nature changes continuously from the creation. We talked about the three realms being involved in the creation of the universe. And from that point of creation, some people call it the Big Bang, some people call it a great big expansion of the universe. There was energy involved, and that energy started to change at that point, and it has never stopped changing since then and now. So a shamanistic view of the world is about that continual change. It's about the continual flux, the ebb and flow of that energy, and the echoes of that creation coming down through the generations. There are no points in time when you can just take. Well, there are points in time when you can take a freeze frame and then say that's what's human. But if you were to do that today, for instance, who is it? Is that somebody from China? Is that somebody from Europe?
Yeah.
Is that somebody from Africa? It's to me, it's not helpful to think of things like that if you want to understand shamanism. And you probably notice every now and again me referring to animals as people. You're probably going to, I think I've done that once already. I had no idea which podcast it was, but you will catch me doing that from time to time. And that's the result of my long involvement in shamanism.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that to me, yeah. Okay. I kind of get it. I'm going to fully hold my hand up and say I kind of get it.
Sure.
I think it's such a nuanced idea. I'm going to have to.
But one of the ways that's quite easy one of the things that's quite easy to see is that we talked about the tree of life, or the tree of knowledge. Sometimes it's called the world tree. For us as a species, I guess if we were wolves or lions or tigers or something, we could have our own kind of world tree idea if we wanted. But for us, because we're primates, the world tree has a bigger meaning. Yeah. Primates developed as tree-dwelling creatures. We literally came from the trees. And there's a lot of characteristics that we have that became important in our shamanism that came because of that, because we were tree-dwelling creatures. I mean, for instance, we have very good depth perception. Now, if you think of leaping from one branch to another, 100 feet above the forest floor and needing to do that thousands or tens of thousands of times in your life and never to miss that branch, because if you miss it once, you've had it. Yeah. That's quite a phenomenal skill that many primates today still have. We talked about the primate that was teasing the tiger cubs. If you say it was actually a gibbon, not an orangutan, although they are reasonably closely related. The gibbon was using the tree as its defense. The tree was its protection. Now, if you think about that, you can think of shamans. When we eventually came down from the trees, human beings came down from the trees, we needed to replace the defense that the trees gave us. The trees, we were kings of the trees. Nobody could touch us up there. Some mere lion comes along. Sure, he's got big pointy teeth, but try swinging through the branches like, that gibbon, Yeah. It's not going to have a hope. That was our defense. But somehow, some way, Australopithecus afarensis ended up on the ground. Yeah, ended up on the ground. And so there are a number of things that enabled that, but effectively it was our shamanism. We said shamans are the protectors of the group. It was our shamanism. Our shamanism became quite strong, which is kind of ironic because these days it's so rubbish. But at one point in time, it became quite strong, and it enabled us to come down safely. And there's a few things involved in that. As I said, the early primates, they had very good binocular vision, but actually they had reasonably limited color vision. It wasn't the greatest. They could tell the difference between sort of blues and yellows, what we would call blues and yellows. But they were, ironically, for creatures living in the branches, the early primates couldn't distinguish between red and green. And this is one of the reasons why some people these days get red-green color blindness. There are proteins in our eyes called opsins. And these are the proteins that are actually sensitive to light. And early primates only had two of these. And that's how they could only distinguish a limited range of colour. What happened to one of the genes that codes for these opsons is that there was a mutation. Sorry, there was a duplication. So first the gene duplicated, and then one of the copies mutated, and so it could pick up a different wavelength of light. And then all of a sudden, we went from this fairly limited color vision to this amazingly rich color vision that human beings have, which has been very, very important in our shamanism. And that gave us, so basically we had 3 opsons in our eyes, where the early primates had only 2. That gave us a lot of advantages. An obvious one would be food selection. Imagine, say it's like an apple or something, or some other kind of fruit, and it's whatever fruit it is, when it's ripe and nutritious and best to eat, it's red, yeah? And when it's young and it's not really good for eating, it's a bit tough, it's green. And you imagine those early primates, they can't distinguish between red and green, right? Yeah. So it's kind of, that type of thing. We could then pick rather than all the food. We said we were hunter-gatherers. Well, the gathering proportion of that, we could use this new color vision to go and pick out food that was the most nutritious. Therefore, we have more time on our hands. We don't have to chew through heavy-duty green stuff. You imagine just eating celery all day long, versus eating nice ripe fruit with loads of energy in it. We had that gave us more time on our hands to do other things, like the kinds of things that shamans went on to do. We'll come on to that in a moment. Yeah. I mean, monkey shamans, if you want to call them that. But another thing was that, both our prey species, that's the things that we ate, the bugs, the whatever it was that we were eating up there in the trees, so some primates eat meat, most of them eat a vegetarian diet. But whatever it was, some of the things that plants and animals don't want us to eat tend to be camouflaged. Well, camouflage, it works on us, some of these well-camouflaged animals, like chameleons and stuff, it works on us, but it works way better on animals that don't have color vision. So it gave us some kind of an advantage, both against the things that we wanted to eat that were camouflaged, and importantly, the things that wanted to eat us. So it allowed us to detect food from a distance, and the camouflage of the things that wanted to eat us was less effective. So this is one of the reasons why this development was going along at the same time as if you want to call them monkey shamans, the individuals within the group were getting more and more powerful. And this is why color, as we'll go into in future podcasts, color became such an important part of shamanism. Well, actually, we've covered a bit in the podcast we've done today. I think, as you mentioned, when those purple cows that we talked about, those visions, they're very, very vivid in the shamanistic state. They
certainly are.
They're very, very vivid, and they're extremely colourful. And this is because one of our specialisms as a group, the later primates, one of our specialisms as a group is that we're good with colour, and therefore obviously that forms a major part of our shamanism, and we used it as part of our shamanism. So you can think of simple examples like the old wise animal in the group, the one that's effectively the monkey shaman, or whatever you want to call him. The young monkeys are looking to him to know which of these things are safe to eat and which things aren't safe to eat. Well, that shaman's developed this amazing color vision. He knows, yeah. There's nothing he hasn't seen in the forest, or in the jungle. There's nothing he hasn't seen. He knows. He just, this kind of a thing, not this kind of a thing, There you can see shamanism starting off, he's starting to help out the rest of the tribe, if you like, of the troop. So color is really, really important in shamanism, and I suspect for this reason, because of our origins and the, quote unquote, world tree, literally the world tree. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that's, quite important is the fact that most animals that have to climb through the trees very rapidly, they need to develop some mechanism. So I've seen like the sloth, there's sort of hooks on the end of its hands so it can go through the trees. But we developed this opposable thumb. What I mean by opposable is a lot of mammals can't actually touch the tip of their thumb or their equivalent of thumb to the tips of their other four fingers. And we can. The reason for that is grabbing onto branches at the end of those jumps. And of course, in order to make tools, to apply our torsional team and experiment and make tools and make things like, for instance, the things that chimpanzees make today, they use their teeth and their fingers and they'll manipulate a stick. They'll strip it. They'll actually turn it into a probe for scooping out nutritious insects from behind the bark of a tree. Or, chimpanzees being chimpanzees, they're not bonobos. They'll turn it into weapons as well. They'll make a spear or they'll make a club. We're not the only tool making animals on this planet. And that opposable thumb that we got from climbing became very, very important in the application of torsional team in the development of tools, which is one of the things that enabled us to come down from the trees and be safe, be safe out on the plain, if you like. Think of who we were competing. We're talking about in Africa here. Think about, we came down from those trees and we went out in the plain and we started competing with lions, You think about it, yeah? Think about it, yeah? Look at us, Well,
so, there's no chance. There's no chance unless, of course, we had those tools to use at our disposal.
Exactly. And this is where I talk about, a monkey's people. Well, they can sure make tools, and they can sure do some damage with them as well, I don't know if people are probably aware how powerful chimpanzees are. The chimpanzee with a club or a spear in its hand is not and angry is not a pleasant prospect or something to have to deal with. However effective your shingy may be,
I'd love to see a chimpanzee with a spear.
Although actually, I've seen a few videos of chimpanzees with spears, so I'm sure you'll find such. I mean, you're not talking about a sophisticated spear like, for instance, Homo erectus would have made. Just a stick, just a pointy stick. But the chimpanzees definitely know the difference between a pointy stick and a non-pointy stick. I'll tell you that. Yeah. So, but they will manipulate tools to a certain extent, but obviously not to the extent that they're cousins. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about our common ancestor, and their later descendants, Australopithecus afarensis, for instance, not to the extent that those guys would manipulate these things. And they found that, as time went by, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and so on, and then Homo neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens, over time, the shamans kept experimenting. They kept trying out different techniques. They found out how to knap flint. They could make some pretty sophisticated tools, and we kept doing that, right through to our modern laptops and our satellites. And it's just like the flow of genetics through generations. That's a flow of technology, and the guys that experimented and came up with the start of that technology, they were effectively the shamans. There was nobody else doing that. That's why torsional team is so important in shamanism. So the other thing which was really important for the development of shamanism was the fact that when tree-dwelling creatures move through the trees, sooner or later they have to climb if you like. They have to climb the vertical surface, the trunk of the tree or vertical branches. They have to climb. And that means they get used to being in an upright position. They, over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, they get used to that upright position. They're not using it very much because they're only using it when they're climbing vertically. But you can see there the propensity for when they come down on the ground to not always walk like most mammals on four limbs. For instance, like dogs as well, like canids, but this idea that you can walk on two limbs, and hey, two limbs leaves your hands free to do things
hold a spear,
or indeed do your spirit dance or whatever else it is you want to do with your hand, play your drum. It allows those hands free for what I call shamanism, the early development of human technology. The role of the shaman was to protect those groups.
I didn't know that's how we stood up, by the way. That how we became. That's really interesting.
So the really, really interesting thing about that is when we did come down to the ground. Now we are talking about, what, people would call Australopithecus afarensis or similar kind of animals to that. I know they're similar to us, but similar kind of animals to that. they started to walk upright, and they found it was useful. They could cover big distances without tiring. But why would tree-dwelling creatures need to cover big distances without tiring, walking upright with a bipedal gait? The bipedal gait's very efficient for moving around. It's good for it's not good for speed, The quadrupedal gait is better for speed. Think about a cheetah and its flexible spine, and it's all four limbs moved in this amazing movement. They can get a high speed. But cheetah's duration is frankly dreadful. They're knackered after 30 seconds. What we're talking about here is a creature that could go for days and days. And then you have to ask yourself, why did they need to do that? Why would we need to walk like that? Well, the only answer to that is we were following our prey species. We'd gone from a.
I was going to say the only logical thing to me was that the trees were no longer there.
Well, whether the trees were there or not, the bottom line is whatever it is we were eating, we were following it around. And my feeling is we started at some point in time to eat the same kinds of things that lions and hyenas and stuff eat. We went after the big stuff, with our new shamanistic technology, enabling us to not only protect ourselves from the lions and the hyenas, but to hunt or scavenge these
and
big
of course
creatures.
Getting much more protein.
Absolutely. But think about that bipedal gait. Monkeys, apes have quite wide hips. That's really good for when you're clinging around the trunk of a tree or hanging on to a branch by your feet. It's really good to have that reach, that big wide hips. The problem with that for a bipedal gait is it's not very efficient. So as evolution progressed, as this ebb and flow of genetic information came down through the generations, our hip bones, we found it advantageous to have narrower and narrower hip bones to bring our legs under our body to support this very efficient walking, fast-paced walking. Incidentally, I should have mentioned ostriches. They're also bipedal and have this great ability to move around on two legs. Yeah. But as the hips narrowed, that created a problem for childbirth. It created a problem for childbirth in that the birth canal narrowed, that the child, as it was born, had to go through a narrower and narrower gap in the pelvis in order to come out into the world. But so that had a knock-on effect for evolution. What that meant was that we couldn't keep the child inside the mother for too long, because the child gets to a certain size, then it's born, it can't come out. So evolution selected for earlier and earlier births with respect to, as the hips narrowed, as the bipedal gait became important, earlier and earlier births. And so effectively we had children born earlier and earlier and earlier. A horse, when it's born, it's up and about, it's up and running about in a, incredibly brief period of time.
Yeah,
when some animals can be up and about and looking after themselves. They have to be, young zebras, for instance, and looking after themselves to a certain extent, in a very short period of time. Human babies, what I'm trying to think. I was about to say the year when my mum stopped looking after me, and I think she's still looking after me now. You don't
want to open that floodgate, do you?
Yeah. So, but what I'm saying is, we started having children earlier and earlier and earlier. The child was born earlier and earlier in its development, and a lot of the development happened outside of the womb.
Externally, yeah, I get it.
Yes.
I get it, yeah.
But think about that. What's if I translate that into shamanistic terms, that meant the child was being born with more and more torsional teen as the generations went past. And so this is why our shamanism became very, very powerful. And it was sort of a, what do you call, a loop, a mutual reinforcement. The need to walk upright narrowed and further narrowed our hips, which meant our children were born earlier and earlier and earlier, which meant our shamans were becoming more and more and more powerful because their torsional teen was ever stronger. And that reinforcement, as you can see what happened over the generations, we turned from a completely useless, not very scary animal into the most scary animal on the entire planet in a relatively short space of evolutionary time.
By becoming more powerful, shamans becoming more powerful, do you mean more inquisitive, more exhibiting more of, those components that we talked about?
Remember what we said, the job of a shaman is to protect the tribe, to look after and care for the tribe. What I mean by more powerful is more able to do that job, or better able to do that job. That's what I mean.
So what you don't mean is more powerful and, he can go on more spirit journeys or anything silly like that. It's more...
Well, do I mean the quality and usefulness of the information gained through his spirit journeys was ever better? Then yes, I do mean that.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily mean the number of spirit journeys was going up. It's because as we've said before, a spirit journey is just one. It's an important one. It's a famous one. And it's quite a difficult one, but it's one of many shamanistic techniques. And all of those shamanistic techniques were beneficial in those days. The question, the esoteric question, the questions for esotericism of that huge range of techniques that were beneficial back before we became a civilized species, what proportion of those techniques are still beneficial today? That's a matter of opinion and conjecture. And, it depends what we want to do with them. But in those days, all shamanistic techniques were useful to those guys. And that's the fact that we've come to dominate this planet is an indication of just how powerful those early shamans were. We come from being, at one end of the scale, creatures that are technically or theoretically capable of wiping out all life on Earth, from a bunch of not very scary ape-like creatures hanging around in the trees and eating fruit. That's you talk about how powerful our shamanism has become as a species. There you go.
And then we forgot all about it.
Yeah. The shamans effectively made us capable by understanding our weaknesses, and deriving ways of overcoming those weaknesses through a close communion and collaboration and experimentation with nature. And that's always been the role of shamans.
We talked about the theme of this podcast being about the domestication of the dog. So
sure.
How do you've talked about the origins of primates and human evolution. So how do you want to link that into the Canids?
Okay, well, let's just talk about where the Canids came from. They've been around a while. They first emerged end of the Oligocene, so that would be about 25 million years ago, something of that nature. If you want to compare that with, for instance, Australopithecus afarensis, showed up about 4 million years ago, maybe 3 to 4 million years ago. They've been around a lot longer, than humans, what we might call humans, The interesting thing, is that, what we call dogs and what we call wolves, they split apart much more recently. And that was between about 30 and 40,000 years ago, something of that nature. And at the time when this happened, humans were exclusively, this is long before the advent of agriculture. Humans were exclusively hunter-gatherers at that time. So again, when we think about the domestication of the dog, we've got to remember there were no farms, there were no farmers, there were no cities, there were nothing like that at the time when this was happening. We were still these hunter-gatherers. We had come down from the trees. We had used our shamanistic tools and created ever more sophisticated versions of them. We got pretty good at hunting, and gathering, but, none of the interaction between dogs and humans happened at a time when we were civilized. That's probably the best way to put it. Mm-hmm. So another interesting fact is that it's quite widely known that dogs and wolves are related, very closely related. But what's probably not so well known is that the type of wolf in inverted commas that dogs split off from, and became dogs, i.e. the type of animal that early humans would have quote unquote domesticated. We'll come on to what that exactly means. Not very closely related to modern wolves. That's in relative terms. So we're not talking about these wolves that are around today. We're talking about a creature that's fairly different from them.
Are they still around today, or are these long gone?
No. Most common ancestors are long gone, because think about it. Or they're still here, depending on your point of view. Think about it. Each, that one common ancestor between modern dogs and wolves. Think of morphing down through the generations from that one person. They've all got this same great recurring grandparent, and morphing down through the generations to become these seemingly different creatures. Yeah. And interestingly, it was the variation in dog populations. Among other populations, famously Darwin went around the world in the Beagle, and he went to the Galapagos Islands and all that stuff. But he was also interested in dogs and pigeons and that type of thing. He called it variation under domestication. And that was one of the major drivers that made him realize the whole evolution thing was happening. Because he saw that human beings could simulate evolutionary pressures. Human beings could simulate the kind of pressures that are put on animals by nature over longer periods in very short periods of time, and you can get something that changes, something that looks like in a relatively few generations. You can take something that looks like a Rottweiler and turn it into a poodle in relatively short generations of selective breeding, So that's the plasticity that I'm talking about, the plasticity of species as it runs down through the generations. But as we said, it was a long time before agriculture. So canids and humans also very widely distributed. Mammals. We weren't once widely distributed. We used to hang around in the trees in Africa, the best evidence we have is that hominids came out of Africa, and before we were hominids coming out of Africa, we were primates hanging around in the trees in Africa. And now we pretty much cover the globe, also, canids pretty much cover most of the globe. You'll find them all over the place, from the Arctic, all the way down to the equator, and then a long way down towards the south as well, So if you think about that, and the fact that both we and they hunt in groups, we're group hunters, and we have to be able to track the movements of the things that we're hunting, then you can start to see that, hey, there was something before we ever hooked up together, dogs and humans, there was quite a lot we had in common. We had these shaman guys who were interested in exploring nature, and the dogs had their shaman guys who were also interested in exploring nature. You probably see where I'm going with this. So the early interactions would have come possibly with humans scavenging the prey of canids, and canids scavenging the prey of humans. I think that one of the other things that I think is... there's this argument whether hominids were scavengers or whether they were hunters. I think that doesn't really if people who ask that question don't really look at real biology. I mean, for instance, hyenas are scavengers just as often as they are hunters. Yeah. And I suspect humans were no different, and the canids of the time were no different. If there was food available for scavenging,
what you do to survive,
we'd have it. And if we needed to hunt it, we'd hunt it. It was that kind of thing, Yeah. So...
It always amuses me, just on a slight tangent, it always amuses me when somebody says nowadays in a first world country, oh, I don't like peas, or I don't like carrots. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
first world problems, eh?
Yeah. So if you think of it like this, through his tortial teen, the human shaman is driven in some way to approach the canid. But through his tortial teen, the canid shaman is driven to approach the human shaman. There's a mutual thing there already. We're not talking about any old member of the human group, and we're not talking about any old member of the canid group. We're talking about these two members who are the ones everybody looks to. They're the ones who've got to make the decisive strategic decisions. Those two creatures, the hominid and the canid, they both have that same drive. If I interact with this other person, then I'll learn more about nature, and I'll learn more from nature, and I'll be able to better help my group through that. And so you can see that when people think about human being, gets a dog, gives it a bit of a bone, there's an advantage to the dog in this beyond just giving it a bone. Yeah. Who's to say the dog didn't come and give the human a bone?
Yeah.
It's just as likely. But you understand that from a shamanistic point of view, from both groups, that not every canid, not every hominid, but those small number who really understood this, understanding the mind, the spirit, and the body, who were in that place, that shamanistic place, they were both motivated to do that. And they found in each other kindred spirits.
They felt like coming together to benefit each other.
And their people. And their people. Yeah. There I am calling animals people again. They found in each other kindred spirits, and they found that working together was better than working alone. And in biology, this is called symbiosis. When we study it in biology, we usually don't talk about dogs and humans, even though they're the most bleeding obvious example of symbiosis that there is just about. And so the picture I'd like to portray is far from one being inferior and one being superior. I don't know if you've ever seen a wolf, a kind of alpha male wolf in full bellow. Not something you want to be talking down to, frankly.
Yeah.
It's not that one was inferior and one was superior. That kind of concept hadn't been invented yet, even in kind of human society. That all came later with the agriculture and the civilization and the social hierarchies and social elites and all that stuff. They invented that nonsense, It was a relationship of equality, of paragality between two very, very capable shamanistic species. Canids also aren't any match for lions. Their shamanism has to be pretty sophisticated to keep them safe, hunting out on the plains in Africa, in the savannah or wherever, their shamanism also protects them. You could say that, top predators like lions, the only thing they've got to worry about is probably themselves or a really pissed off elephant or something like that, But these more gracile animals like ourselves and the canids, we needed that. We both needed that. And so we developed this symbiosis. And so the way I'd like to portray this is that if you think about it, the spirit of a domestic dog, nochoi, is to some extent a merging of spirit between the human spirit and the spirit of a wolf or wolf ancestor. Chonoch is the wolf spirit. Incidentally, this word chono, meaning wolf, is quite important in Mongolian culture. The Mongols, in their legends, descended from a wolf called Bot Chono. Bot means a blue-grey, a very auspicious color. And Bot Chono and Guamaral, the fallow doe, or the dark doe, are actually viewed as the ancestors of the Mongolian people. In a very similar vein, the eagle hunters of the Altai Mountains in the west of Mongolia see themselves as being descended from the mating of a man and a she-wolf. These people are among, I guess you would say they're among the most impressive people in the world. They indulge in a type of hunting that you might describe as the ultimate extreme sport. Of course, it's not a sport; it's hunting, which is they hunt wolves with golden eagles, which I find quite incredible, frankly. The wolf is an animal that's well respected in shamanistic communities that have familiarity with wolves, and I believe that that's also on that basis that they see a kindred spirit in that creature. So moving on. So now this is after the symbiosis has occurred. Yeah, we start working together, dogs and humans. For instance, we can help them hunt. They can help us hunt. That's effectively how it works. They can, and when we invented pastoralism, they can do things like help us guard the sheep, guard the goats, guard the camels, whatever it is we're gardening.
And I would imagine that's where we started realizing that we could breed the dogs for specific purposes.
Yeah, but there's other ways to look at it. That's also probably where the dogs started realizing that they could manipulate us for specific purposes. Think about modern dogs. A lot of dogs have very neotenous characteristics. Modern dogs have neotenous characteristics of human children. And if you've ever had the blessing or pleasure of meeting a pug, you probably know what I mean. Quite a few dogs are like that. They are cute to the point of their owners, and even people who've just met them for a short time will bend over backwards to make them happy. And they are just like our own children. They're extremely good at manipulating us. This is what I mean. It's symbiosis. It's who is it that's manipulating who? Who's taking advantage of who? And so what we can say is that
is a very interesting way to look at it.
The spirit of humans. If you meet a pug, if you've never met a pug in your life, I recommend meeting one.
I have met a pug.
They have
several times.
Yeah.
Bizarre dogs there.
Yeah, but they have characteristics of human children. Now, we're talking about spirit animals. There's an animal with a human spirit. Yeah, with a part of a human spirit that's taken on part of a human spirit, and it's for a purpose. It's not for no purpose. It's taken on that spirit because it knows in its genes. I don't mean just on the baseline. It knows its spirit and its body and its mind. It knows that taking on that spirit is advantageous. You're going to keep feeding it. You're going to keep taking it for walks. You're going to keep buying it presents. You're going to go, aren't you cute? And that kind of thing, So there's shamanism the other way. This is what I'm saying. In a way, that's dog shamans taking on human characteristics. Now, whether, how much human beings are involved in that and how much dogs are involved in that, from our modern, I think Terence McKenna used the word dominator culture. The civilization started dominating people and animals and the environment. This kind of dominator culture. From the dominator culture's perspective, we could say that we made pugs like that. We bred them and we made them like that so that they would please us, Well, I've seen a lot of people trying to please pugs, and other cute dogs. They're not the only cute dog in the world, yeah. But I don't just mean in terms of in cuteness. That's one example. Dogs can be very loyal. Famously they will stay with their owners through thick and thin. Their owners in inverted commas. Humans can be very, very loyal to dogs. And personally, I'm not particularly a dog lover, so I'm saying these things from a shamanistic point of view. It's
there's a duality there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a definite symbiotic relationship. It has been. Obviously, the relationship between humans and dogs has very often been messed up by society, by dominator culture, by the rise of civilization, in the same way that relationships between humans and humans have been messed up. If I believe that before the rise of agriculture and before the time when the agricultural surplus invented these rich guys who started trying to create dominator culture and dominator religions, before that time, I believe that it was an entirely symbiotic relationship, that it was equally mutually beneficial to both parties, to the Canids and to the humans.
Mm. So, given that humans have little to virtually nil shamanism today, what do you think about where we're going?
It's not true. It's not true. You can't. Despite how hard certain dominator cultures have tried, you cannot eradicate shamanism. Mm. Shamanism is built into nature. It's a fact of nature, and as I think we've discussed today a little bit, shamanism is not limited to the human species. In most groups of social animals, there will be a creature that the other animals look to for help and guidance in times of trouble and danger. And to the definition that we've given, the non-woo-woo definition of shamanism that we've given, that creature is a shaman within that group, because that's what all shamans were there for. That's all they ever were there for, was to protect and nurture and care for the group, relatively small group of which they were a part. So where is shamanism going today? I don't know that today it's heading in a brilliant direction. But what I would say to you is that if we were having this discussion 400, 500, 600 years ago, they might have tied us to a post, put some logs underneath and set a light to them. Yeah, I think there's been some kind of progress in society in some societies towards opening up to the point where we can maybe be more open. Because, even 100 years ago, this stuff was very, very much limited to the secret societies. And, people talk about secret societies and why are they secret? There must be something sinister there. No, they were secret because if you found out what you were studying in those secret societies, they would tie you to a post, they would put logs underneath, and they would set you alight. That's why they were secret. It was a very, very good reason, So who knows is the answer. But what I do know is you cannot eradicate shamanism, because, as I've said, if you take a human population that are not shamanistic at all and you put them in a wild place with relatively little safety net and relatively little protection, then, and you leave them for a few generations and you come back, you'll find a shaman among them. And that's because the only thing that can teach shamanism is nature. Fantastic.
What a great way to stop. I think That's been a great episode. It's been kind of a good, again, a nice overview of, I don't know, what the depths of shamanism, what shamanism really is. I mean, because I think so many people have this idea that shamanism is, and I mean, certainly I did until we started doing these. Well, it was before before these podcasts, but people, they'd be thinking shamanism is literally you do a spirit journey, you answer questions, and that's kind of it.
But the question there is, where did that come from, and why did that arise? It's not purposeless. This is what we said very early on, didn't we? Yeah. Shamanism is a very, very directed thing. It always has a purpose, and it's that purpose that gives it its meaning. And that's not only what gives it its meaning, it's also the reason it arose in the first place, evolutionary speaking, that there was a need for it. These weak, useless, compare look at the fingernails on your hands and compare them to the claws of the claws of a lion, or the teeth of a lion, or the claws of a tiger. Yeah. We are rubbish at that kind of thing, right? We're rubbish at that kind of thing. So we needed something else, and our something else that we developed as a substitute that enabled us to come down from the safety of our world tree, from the safety of our tree of life, our tree of knowledge, was shamanism.
Cool.
That's what enabled us to do it.
Cool. All right, let's stop there then. So, yeah, fantastic. That's been episode 10. We'll be back next week with episode 11. Remember, please send me an email to Joe, that's Joe, at wovenenergy.com. Send me any questions you have about anything to do with shamanism and the episodes we've had so far, and I'll get them onto a Q&A session. Hope you've enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you again next week.